Yep, thank you and good afternoon to all. Yeah, I don't have the SCR logo, so I thought since it's National Day just passed in Singapore, I should have the flag behind me. Allow me to thank the organizer and the panelists for making this event possible. I would also like to thank you, audience, for making time to join us in SensorFlow's first virtual panel, which is entitled Advancing Your Hotel Recovery from COVID-19 Crisis with Technology. Yep. So by this time, I think most of us would already conclude that this pandemic is real. It is not a political ploy, as some world leaders would have put it. And as the world inches to recover from COVID-19 pandemic, occupancy rates, as you can see, are beginning to rise, and travel bans are gradually being lifted, along with the emergence of new industry regulations. So hotels, and most of you are in this industry, are faced with the new norm and have to adapt in order to bounce back stronger after the crisis. And one of these adaptation that has emerged smart technology for contactless management, for energy efficient strategies. So with us today is our panel to discuss this ease and pains of adoption. What technological advancement are there available in this current era, and how to choose and leverage on the right smart solution to cater to the unique needs of our situation today, your hotels. And the panel will discuss and will provide unique insights, hopefully helpful resources as well to answer the questions that you may have. And of course, as an operator or as an owner, to adapt to the new norm and to become smarter and more efficient, and of course, more productive. So with us today is, he's the CEO and the co-founder of Singapore Startup. He's one of the youngest top leaders in the region. He has built technical expertise to transform the company into viable business model, scalable across different markets. He also has a background in energy management and smart home automation, and is specialized expert in the AI and digital transformation for buildings. His name is Sai Krishnan Ranganathan, or better known to us as Sai, the CEO and co-founder of SensorFlow. The other gentleman that we have here, he has vast investment experiences. He advises company and startup in Malaysia and Southeast Asia. He was previously the director of Rasma Corporation, which is a Malaysian engineering firm for infrastructure projects. His investment experiences was with the Goldco Management Company and also with Goldman Sachs Asset Management. His name is Raja Hamza Abidin, or we call him Hamza, the co-founder and co-managing partner of RHL Ventures. The third panelist we have, she has over 12 years of hotel operations experience under her belt, an expert in events and F&B for 5-star international hotels, both in the city as well as in resorts. And she, like you, like us, has faced the COVID-19 pandemic firsthand in the front line. And she most recently worked in Bali, handled the impact of coronavirus that has on her property, and implementing new measures and procedures to ensure that the hotels under her care can operate efficiently and her guests feel safe. She's also the only lady in the panel. Please welcome Benaf Ivia. And being the only lady in the house, in the panel, you have the honor to start us with. So perhaps, Benaf, if you can share with us and mute yourself, what are the challenges that you're facing today, especially related to cost and energy in your operations, with hotels facing the new norm, adapting to, in order to bounce back stronger. What are some of the most critical trends that you have seen and pressing challenges you have to face in terms of technological adaptation or adoption rather? Benaf?
Thank you. So yeah, like everybody in our industry, obviously, we're feeling this, and Bali especially has just been, it's like a different island. And I don't think we really know at the moment what the new normal is. We very much feel like we're in the eye of a storm, and we won't really know the true impact until the dust has settled and until people really start to travel again. And whilst we do see a little bit of occupancy here and there, they're talking about 1 to 2 years to get occupancy levels back to the level they were at in 2019. And so 2021 is going to be a very, very tough year. The focus is very much on delivering a higher level of cleanliness, obviously, a higher level of hygiene, maintaining service standards, but to do that with less costs because we have to recover from this year. And then the other side to that is, for the last 10 years, most companies have been doing a lot of work with sustainability. And unfortunately, this year, that has all been put to one side while we just try to survive. I think survival is the key word for 2020. And then 2021 will be, okay, you know, we need to recover. We need to start the recovery process. And so focuses at the moment are on touchless. So anything that can be done without any kind of interaction or contact is a huge focus at the moment. Mobile keys, so hotels are moving away from key cards, and there's a big drive to get the mobile key system set up. And then coming up as well inside the room, how can we reduce contact within the room? So what can we do that makes that a more hygienic space with less potential surfaces for contact or contamination? And with sustainability, it's not going away. And I know that a lot of property leaders are still looking for ways that they can be sustainable and they can reach those goals whilst reducing costs and recovering from this year.
So it was quite interesting to hear what you said, the higher level of hygiene. And then you bring that into the last 10 years of hotels trying to be more sustainable and putting sustainable projects up, but now has been put aside. In replacement is the reducing the contact in the room. So with what you have experienced in terms of events and F&B, I would believe that the hotel operations in terms of occupancy rates would have been reduced very much with almost no international arrival. Is that true?
Yeah, our hotel stayed open through June. We closed on the 30th of June. For the majority of May and June, we had one room in house. Other hotels, a lot of hotels on the island have closed down. A lot of local hotels have closed down and probably won't reopen in the immediate future and kind of the next year. And it's just financially, the money has run out. It's not about a balanced profit and loss statement anymore. It's just about cash. If there's no cash, they can't pay vendors, they can't pay bills. I know a lot of vendors on the island are in trouble now because they haven't been paid. Not necessarily the larger companies, but definitely a lot of the local companies that just don't have that cash flow. And unfortunately, working for a larger international company, you can negotiate payment plans, and that flexibility is really helping the survival, I think, of a lot of hotels.
Yeah. If our organizer Peyton, or maybe I can do that. Peyton, if you can share a slide up there, which I have provided earlier, on the cost of utilities, I think that will be quite relevant to what Pranav has just mentioned.
Sure, and even, you know, the hotels that are closed at the moment, each company has their own closed hotel protocol, and that involves running the air conditioning because you don't want the rooms to get moldy. You know, Bali is very humid. It means we have to flush water through all of the systems on a regular basis to stop pipes from getting dried and cracking. It means you need to keep the pool running because the cost of emptying a pool, refilling it, doing a Legionella test is a lot higher actually than running it, but it's still a cost, you know. So even with a hotel closed, the utilities cost is still very high. It's probably higher than salaries.
Yeah, and a good point. So, audience, if you can see this data that came out from 2018 and 2019 wouldn't have been very different. So you see that utility bills or utility costs rather has gone up. And this is in Thailand that you're seeing right at the moment, which is 7.1% from the year before, against all the other departmental expenses that that has increased, but utilities would have gone up a lot more. It's a similar story if we look at Malaysia at close to 5%. And so with what we see today and with the reduced demand, there is definitely a need to look at that where we try to look at every area and every aspect where we can save costs. Let's move to Hamza and ask Hamza, you know, as an investor, what do you look for when you hunt for, you know, a property or investment? Is this relevant as smart hotel technology? Is this relevant to what you're looking for as an investor? Hamza?
So, okay, I think you guys can hear me, right? So I think from an investor perspective, this whole COVID environment has put things in a very interesting perspective. Obviously, the hotel industry is one of the industries where we've seen companies being heavily affected. This relates to the travel industry, which is a huge hit. We have a popular company called in the travel space, and honestly, they are struggling very badly. So just calling a spade a spade. But moving forward, I think the companies that can survive through this environment will probably survive the next 4 to 5 years easily, right? So as a fund, we are on the heavily lookout on opportunities. And if there's technologies that can bring efficiencies to buildings, to hospitality-related assets, I think it's a perfect time to try, given that most operators are finding smart ways to reduce costs or to increase efficiencies. So I think during a normal time, if I'm an operator, I probably will not test as many solutions or try a lot of solutions, given that it's not a distressed time. But there's ways, whether it's through saving energy, like saving energy costs, increasing efficiencies. There's always ways to cut and slice the pie, meaning that as an investor, it could make if a business can make it sustainable in this time. I think it makes things much more interesting compared to a normal base case non-COVID perspective.
Cool. Could you share with us also some insights on the advancement that you see, the direction of technology in terms of innovation, especially in Southeast Asia?
So the way I've seen it, we are still very much focused on the second or third layer type opportunities, right? So you're talking about fintech. One of the spaces that's been sexy is like the digital banking licenses that's been issued by a different supranational, whether it's Malaysia, whether it's Philippines, Singapore. So there are, I think there's still pockets of opportunities across all sectors. I wouldn't just say that there's only like say prop techs and interesting part. There's also e-commerce is still booming, but I think it's those companies that can take advantage of the dislocations of the markets during COVID and pivot accordingly. I think that's when you can do well. For example, I think I was just speaking to one investor, and he had a portfolio that targets the accommodation management or hotel management space, and they've pivoted from being a lot of shorter leases to longer term leases, for instance, right? And they've changed their business mix. Obviously, margins have taken a slight hit, but at least from a longer term perspective, there's revenue stability and revenue. There's some revenue coming in. So I think it's just being realistic. And as an investor, we also find that you can find opportunities at a more decent price, given that capital markets have been so fluid over the past few years and the lower environment has persisted. Capital now is very fungible. So it's very cheap, right? So opportunities may be expensive because of that.
Thanks for that, Hamza. I'm quite happy to see that there's already questions coming through, and this is directed to Banaf. So we'll answer those questions as they come, since this is quite fluid. Otherwise, at the end of the session, we can also have any questions and answers that we couldn't tackle in the course. So the question, Banaf, is you mentioned the challenge of less contact in the room and keeping up with new imposed cleaning methods. It's common knowledge that most of the new methods are focused around using more cleaning chemicals and more frequently. So looking at sustainability, this is to be counterproductive, due to increased plastic wastage and the use of these chemicals. Do you do it differently?
We work with Ecolab, I think, as many big hotels do, and Ecolab are quite proactive in coming up with ways. I mean, you can't eliminate plastic usage, but to buy things in bulk, to have refillable packaging. So Ecolab are definitely a good partner to work with in that sense. In terms of other plastic items, like reusable gloves, different policies have come out from different companies. And I know 4 seasons, I think you have to use four sets of reusable gloves during room cleaning, whereas someone else might say, well, you can continue to use reusable gloves, but it's not really protecting anyone, so hand washing is preferred. And I think as we go through this process, we're learning every day. Every challenge we come across presents a new opportunity to innovate. And so I think the further we go through this process of recovery, innovations will come. But yeah, it's not easy, and we're definitely not perfect. And I'm a big sustainability champion, and so it really hurts me to see a lot of the work that has been done almost has to be undone to be able to get into this recovery stage.
Yeah, thank you for that. And to build on what Hamza has said, I'm going to turn to Sai. But before we get into SensorFlow's technology, what do you see as an insight on tech advancement from your perspective as a solution provider for the hotel? Is it easy to adopt? Are hotels resisting it? As far as I know from my time as a hotelier, hotels are usually slower to adopt in terms of new tech.
Yeah, it's actually quite interesting because like you said earlier, hotels are not known for adopting technology pretty quickly. And I think one of the things that's been interesting with COVID is, once the sort of pandemic settled in and occupancy rates started to go down, a lot of hotels started to think about, when they reopen, how can they hit a break-even point at a lower occupancy rate? Because that's the question right now, right? Like, how can I stay afloat? How can I still sort of make back my operational expenses while still remaining open and welcoming whatever guests I can get at this stage? And so, traditionally what we've seen is, unless you're like a big group like Marriott or Hilton, who can hit sort of break even at 35% occupancy, maybe 40% in some cases, you're going to need sort of higher occupancy rates than that to actually sort of keep it, reasonably profitable for you to welcome guests during a low season, during a pandemic like this. And what we're seeing now is, a lot more hotels are putting focus on cost cutting and expenses, especially through digitization and automation. And so even with sort of customers that we've spoken to, like maybe 2 years ago, 3 years ago, when we did conferences, or like when we sort of went and pitched at these sort of events, we're seeing them sort of come back on like our sort of social media channels, on the website, asking us about these solutions, but in a sort of renewed fashion, because they're looking at where can I cut expenses, right? And the two biggest expenses are labor and utilities. And one of the interesting points that Bernard was talking about is how even if your hotel is closed, you still have utilities expenses, which tend to be now higher than salaries, because you have to keep things running, and automating those things and like timing them just right can actually bring down that sort of utilities expenses considerably. And when you do start to open up, hotels are starting to look at how can I cross skill my staff, right? Like how can the maintenance guy also be a housekeeper, or how can I get the front desk to do housekeeping on an alternate shift? And but I've lost my sort of middle management layer. So how am I going to sort of make sure they have the right tasks allocated, and that they're doing a good job? How do I verify that they follow protocol? Some of these people have just been trained recently. So these are sort of the new unmet needs and problems that we see surface as customers talk to us. And I think honestly, it's both good and bad, obviously. The bad being obviously the industry has taken a massive hit. But the good thing is people are now starting to rethink how they run their hotel operations. And sustainability as well has started to take a slightly different meaning. Instead of sort of looking at a lot of the more visible things, like not using plastic straws and like using some glass bottles versus like plastic bottles, it's becoming more the big ticket items, like how can I reduce my overall carbon footprint from utilities, from the actions that I take. How can I sort of incentivize guests to do less laundry or do less sort of turnover, but more sort of energy savings measures. So this is sort of what we're seeing now as the effect post-COVID.
Yep. So Sai kind of also with that responded to one question that asked, are there any solutions that focus on cost reduction in hotels which are marketable as being more sustainable? That straw reduction or no usage of straws could be one of them. Back to you again, because it was interesting to hear that what you have said. Is there something that's needed for the hotel to take place before an adoption of technology or new tech or smart tech, as you call it, needs to happen? Is it better for, say, a city hotel compared to a resort property?
So from the data that we've seen from customers that we had, sort of both city hotels, resorts, service departments, what we've seen is that there is some difference in how the guests behave and sort of how they use the facilities. We find with sort of resorts, there's a lot more sort of usage of rooms. But also coincidentally, there is a lot more energy costs as well, because they tend to be distributed versus in a central building. And that introduces sort of costs that are related to, like heating, cooling, hot water distribution, all of those. And so what we've seen is that, with hotels that are already running, it's really important that you're able to retrofit technology versus making it a huge CapEx spend, where there's a lot of sort of work that might disrupt guests. Although, like right now, most hotels are closed, and in theory, you can sort of do that installation work. You can sort of, like open up walls to run wires and all that. Of course, there's a problem of cash flow. There's no sort of cash to actually go about doing that. So it's actually like a double-edged sword, or rather, it's like a double whammy now, where being a retrofittable technology also has sort of less installation costs for the end customer, which means that it's getting better to sort of go ahead and do these things before your hotels open up, because you can install it faster. You don't need to worry about sort of guests being around. And with the right sort of financing and business models, which I'm sure Hamza would be able to sort of fill in, you would be able to, like get really good sort of providers to come in and install and, like actually help you realize the value proposition and savings before you get charged for it. There are a lot of sort of providers who work on long-term partnerships. There are a lot of sort of historical companies that are like energy service companies on the sort of utility side, or even sort of like, outcome-driven revenue companies where they set up specific sort of measures and goals that you want to achieve, and then when you achieve that, you get a bonus. And this sinks in very well with hoteliers because they themselves work on a sort of bonus structure with regards to gross operating profit or NOI for the owner. So there's a lot of sort of providers out there who work on similar models with regards to reducing expenses on both sort of utilities as well as sort of the salary costs or the operational cost of running the hotel.
Thanks for that, Sai. I'm going to turn to Pranav and Hamza. So, because you have different perspective, but then the key challenges of and the concerns of implementing smart tech, because the hotel to rethink, as what Sai may have said, that at some point it is easy. Some, you have to think about the cost and raise a CapEx, but there are technologies that are not. So, what I think those are real challenges, and across all the audience as well would agree with me. Not just only on the cost, but after the implementation, will they become one day obsolete, right? And that question will be, for you, is it something that you consider, and what are the considerations you put in place? What do you look out for in implementing new tech from both hotel as well as from guest perspective? Enough?
So when we look at new technology coming into the hotel, a lot of it comes from the corporate level because they go through various assessments. They need to make sure that it matches the brand, it matches our values, what standards we have, and so over the last couple of years, I can say that I think companies have gotten very good at training their people in how to use new technology and how it impacts guests. But I think other challenges are actually, guests are very used to things being a certain way. Quite often they don't like change. So that could be something that would be considered. And to be really frank with you, I think after the last 6 months, we've become very adaptable to change. And I think any change that is gonna save money, reduce workload would be welcomed, and people would be open to that. Yeah.
Hamza, you want to add to that?
I think nothing specific to add. I think I'm okay with the answer.
Yeah. So, in terms of one of the most promising and prospective technology, and you have seen it from an investor point of view, Hamza. Can you share with us something that you have seen and you feel that hotels should really adopt, and which is for the better good, not just only for this COVID-19 cost-saving reasons, but also in terms of sustainability. I guess that's what you mentioned, something that you look out for, innovation.
Yep. I think for buildings in general, moving forward, with ESG and green being a much more important factor. I think anything related to energy saving, both from hotels or from a government building or from a industrial building perspective, still makes sense. I know SensorFlow is part of that, but I think in general, even in Malaysia, within the government, there's been talks of more contracts being converted into energy performance contracts. So in a time where costs are rising and a time where every dollar counts, I think technology is focused on that, but spun off in a way that is scalable and it's understood by the market quickly. I think it's still something interesting, but honestly, from a tech perspective, it's still very early days for a lot of any solutions or any tech related to this. I think most of the guys that have been funded in the market are, at least from a larger ticket size perspective, they're still very much more consumer related plays.
Yeah. Okay. So, and since we have Sai on the call, we definitely will have to ask him, And it's in relation to a question that came up from the audience, which is energy cost reduction is essential for recovery as well as the future profitability. How can technology in energy monitoring and management be implemented? Sorry.
Yeah, the risk of
certainly
the risk.
About technology as well.
Yeah, I mean, the risk of tooting my own horn, like this is exactly sort of what we focus on. So for us, what we've seen is, especially with hotels, being able to retrofit these solutions is super crucial. You do not want to be disturbing your guests. You do not want sort of any downtime to operations. You want to make sure that the interior decor is not affected by installing these things. You have to remain as inconspicuous as possible. How do you then sort of work on the hotel's business model, right? Like you have to make sure that any savings that you achieve is something that you use as the basis for charging the hotel revenue. And I think this is where sort of our strengths lie as well. So, SensorFlow, what we do is we retrofit wireless sensors in hotel rooms to automate the HVAC system, the air conditioning or heating if you're on one of the more sort of colder climates. And by sort of automating that based on guest behavior, we are able to save anywhere between 30 to 50% on the HVAC costs. But we also collect a lot of useful data. So we collect data on how the air conditioning system works, how much energy it's using, is it cooling the room fast enough, are there humidity issues, but also we have occupancy data. So we're able to use that to, help the housekeeping plan their schedule better, but also potentially now with COVID, avoid coming in contact with guests unnecessarily, because you can actually see in real time sort of what the occupancy in the rooms are. And with regards to maintenance, because you have this rich data on how your rooms are performing and how it feels in terms of guest comfort, you can actually plan your maintenance cycles a lot better as well to make sure you don't get any guest complaints from rooms that are not well maintained. And so, for us, one of the things that really sort of sets us apart is our business model as well. We do not charge hotels anything up front. We literally just install everything at zero cost to the hotel. And then on a monthly basis, we generate what's known as the savings report, where we talk about sort of what was the savings we achieved that month. And then we take a fixed percentage of the savings as our revenue. So this way, the hotel's never paying out of pocket. It's purely based on the value and savings achieved. And what this means is, especially during COVID, and you never know when there's going to be a second wave and third wave and whatnot. Even if your occupancy rates go down and you're saving less money, you just pay whatever sort of based on whatever you save, and there's no sort of fixed cost that you have to worry about that might affect your cash flow and cash burn as well. And for us, being aligned this way with the hotel is what lets us partner with them rather than just being another vendor. And a lot of our product development is also driven by our customers. So a lot of what I shared earlier in terms of what we're seeing as unmet needs and problems, those are things that we hear from our customers when our team speaks with them. And I think it's going to be very interesting going forward when hotels start to open up and when they start adopting these sort of new technologies. And a lot of the data that comes from these technologies is going to be very, very relevant to how they can operate more efficiently and thus sort of break even at a lower occupancy rate.
Yeah, so it's not just during this period where they are trying to save costs, but also in the future, and that's where your technology comes in to help them to be even more efficient.
Yeah, I think the higher your occupancy rate, the more savings, basically, because you have more usage, you're able to save more on that usage, and because you need more staff, you're able to be more productive with the number of staff that you need. What you're optimizing is both a sort of operations problem, but also a sort of utilities expense problem. And I think these are the biggest expenses for any hotel, and it is heavily correlated with occupancy rates. So when occupancy rates go down, you want to make sure that your costs go down, not just by a linear factor, but potentially more. And when occupancy rates do rise up, you want to make sure that it doesn't climb in a linear factor, but more logarithmically. So that way you're managing costs, even when your occupancy rates start to go up and down as people sort of, travel restrictions come in or countries change their restrictions and border closings and all that. So being smart and being able to sort of digitize your hotel, I think that should be the sort of most important thing most hoteliers should focus on next year. And I think it just sets them up for success even beyond COVID, like even beyond all the vaccines and everything. Once the world does return to sort of steady state, you are going to be in a much better position operationally to actually sort of do better for your owners, actually get a better NOI, better ROI, and sort of better GOP as a property.
So I get to ask this as a moderator. What are the critical steps and useful tips for hotel to look for when selecting or adopting smart tech? I'm going to ask you that question because I'm going to put you on the stand, not just to talk about SensorFlow, but in your opinion, really, what do they really need to look out for?
So, I mean, again, I think Bharat might be able to give a better answer than me. But what I see from speaking with customers is they're mainly looking for two things, right? One is can you show that the way you're going to sort of work with me is more on a partnership basis, that you understand that we are going through this hard time, and that you're willing to work alongside us to like get a win-win situation, right? Like the last thing you want is a vendor who's going to sort of enforce strict payments and contracts in a period where everything is very hard to guess or even plan. And I think building that sort of fluidity into your customer agreements, into your sort of contracts is essential now. And it also, it's exactly what the hotels need, because it gives them confidence that this person is not in it for sort of the short term, but they're in it for sort of the long term. And they're able to sort of work with you beyond COVID in a much more sort of reasonable fashion. That's a very important point right now. And I think any vendor, any sort of technology company out there that's working with hotels should seriously consider that as being their sort of near-term goals. The second thing from sort of a technology perspective is how easy it is to integrate yourself into the hotel's existing infrastructure. Because a lot of the solutions out there, they tend to need new infrastructure set up, which can cost a lot of money, which owners simply do not have right now. The hotels, whatever money they've allocated in the past towards CapEx, that's all being gobbled up now. So forget CapEx, right? You got to focus on how do you bring down your own costs as a technology provider so that you can then reduce the cost of adoption, and then find interesting sort of finance alternatives to actually get this solution installed in a cheap manner, in a manner in which you can actually make those payments at a later date or on a delayed basis or on an installment basis. And this is also something that technology companies need to think from an investor's perspective, like how can I leverage on sort of money out there that can actually potentially be a win-win for both the investor, because over the long term you can actually make sort of more money from this, more IRR from this. But in the short term, because you have a lot of hotels that need this tech, you can actually get a good share of the market. And I think being able to sort of bridge that gap between business and tech is super crucial in a period like this. And I think this is what most hotels will be looking for when they're adopting their technology providers.
I'm going to switch to Pranav with a question from the audience. With additional costs incurred in new tech, how was the impact to business operation and revenue?
Well, I think the majority of hotels, it's too soon to tell the impact in revenue. I think very much this year, we were basically told all of your goals are kind of out of the window at the moment because no one can predict what's going to happen, and so I think what Sai mentioned is thinking more about the long term, and how are we going to get out, and then how do we recover and start really optimizing this revenue that is coming in, and so having those savings come back and thinking about it in more of a long-term plan is definitely something. And a lot of the larger ticket technology items, like they have the sprayers and things like that, they're not mandated, so it's optional for hotels. If they want to go out and make those purchases, they can, but it's not we're not saying that you all need to go out and buy this brand new technology. I'll give you an example. One of my colleagues from another hotel in Bali was telling me that his owner had gone out and bought a virus-proof carpet, so that you would step on this carpet and the carpet sucks the virus off you, you know. So people are definitely making purchases, but I think the larger companies are a little more skeptical and doing a little bit more due diligence before they go out and make big purchases. But yeah, it's a little too soon to say, because there's nothing to measure these revenues and profits on at the moment.
Yeah, I was about to ask you, would there be any redeployment of existing manpower, and maybe laying carpet would be one.
Definitely.
Yep.
Redeployment
Yep.
of existing manpower, definitely. It was a good exercise during the beginning of this to move people around. You know, a lot of hotels have interns, trainees, daily workers, contract workers. They've all gone now, and in a lot of places contracts aren't being renewed where possible. So I could say that we were looking at a 30% reduction in headcount next year. And so there will definitely be some cross-utilization of where we put people and how we manage those situations.
Cool. I'm going to just ask the audience if they have any questions. Please continue to post them as we get them. We have around about 15 minutes to answer some of these questions. Well, you have Sai and you have Hamza and Bernard on the call. Please shoot your questions. Yep. But as we move along, and so this question will be for all three, kind of bringing us into the future where we hopefully see a vaccine coming through. The hope is probably not this year, but if it does come, where do you see the future hotels in terms of smart tech? Will properties change? Will sustainability change in terms of the approach side?
So I think, you know, like it's going to be very interesting in terms of how people perceive hospitality after going through this experience of avoiding touch. Because one of the things that I actually sort of firmly believe in, hospitality is a lot about people, which is why you don't see us sort of building robots here at SensorFlow. And yeah, like it's sort of getting to this point where like avoiding contact has become the norm. And you know, a lot of that sort of personal touch and like sort of greeting at what you see at hotels. That's going to be interesting as to how technology can play a role in keeping that sort of human interaction, while it's not necessarily sort of it being face to face. And yeah, I think honestly, it's a hard challenge. It's a hard problem there to, you know, sort of be able to deliver the same kind of warmth and experience via sort of a digital platform. So it's going to be very interesting to see how hospitality tackles that. As for sustainability, you know, like I sort of agree with Bernard that in the last 10 to 12 years, like there's been a lot that hotels have been doing, from like food waste reduction to like zero waste to landfill, you know, adopting sort of heat exchange on, you know, the mechanical side of the building to, you know, not use boilers, but actually sort of recover the heat from, you know, cooling the building. And a lot of progress has been made in those sort of parts. And I think it's just a challenge now because a lot of these things do tend to cost money up front, and you have this sort of liquidity problem. But, you know, it's always about the long term, right? Like 1-2 years lost can simply be gained as long as people sort of put a conscious effort to it. So I still think in the long term, hospitality as an industry will be more sustainable. And I actually wager that, you know, with solutions that do make you more profitable by being sustainable, those actually are long-term sort of solutions. And so because of this whole COVID situation and how hospitality is becoming more and more digitized, you know, after sort of 2022 or something, you would see a lot more technology adoption, which in turn would enable a lot more sustainability measures, which means the overall savings that you would sort of expect in the next decade, 2020 to 2030, might actually be higher than, you know, pre-COVID, right? And that's actually a possibility. But of course, it's in the hands of sort of all the technology companies and the sort of investors and hospitality veterans to, think along those lines. And I think that's definitely possible. Just takes a few people to push the right message.
Mm-hmm. Hamza, what about your views of the future of hotels? You're mute. Sorry, Hamza.
Yeah, I think it's quite an interesting time. I was just at my first hotel stay last week ever since COVID started. So I went to the Westin in Desaru, which is actually probably half an hour away from Singapore. It's probably closer to Singapore than it is to me in KL. But anyway, there's small nuances, right? So, now they ask you to use the mobile key as the only option, whereas before, I think it was either optional. Small nuances like in the there's still a buffet spread, but there's a server that's serving it, so there's actually distance between the food and the individual. So it's just interesting to just watch these small things happen, and it happened naturally, right? I think and it is because of COVID, but the good part is, as I mentioned, it's adoption of technology is the only way forward, right? Maybe it's automation of food serving. Maybe it's even some of the food preparation gets more automated. So I think across the board, as an operator of hospitality assets, I would foresee an increase in uptake of technology because you'll be very much more margin focused, and you'll be less human resource or people focused after this, given that you've gone through this tough period and you just become stronger after that, right? So I'm actually looking forward to what will happen in the next 1-2 years post this. Obviously, I still foresee a big contraction in terms of number of hotels, or at least change of ownership of some of these hotel groups, because you do see, especially the smaller budget hotels, struggling tremendously. I heard, I was talking to a friend who owns the Four Seasons in Malaysia, and they also own the Concord Hotel, which is a sort of a 4-star hotel. At least at a 5-star level, they still see numbers being at least relatively better, but at a 4-star level, it's just totally decimated given the number of rooms that they have. So you'll see winners, you'll see people die out, but all in all, I think technology will be leveraged even further, and it's a good time to invest.
Thank you for that. The lady, Pranav, what do you see in the future in your crystal ball?
In my crystal ball, I recently flew with Qatar Airways from Bali to France, and when I sat back and after I'd kind of got off the plane and thought through the process, there were so many changes, but actually during the flight you didn't notice because they still have the people there. So to agree with Sai, hospitality is all about people. And I think as long as companies can manage that balance between having people making their guests feel that they're being looked after, that there aren't too many changes, then as an operator you can win, but you would need to offset that cost. And so look into bigger ticket items such as SensorFlow. Also, I know a lot of hotels are looking at water bottling plants within their property because eliminating plastic straws and plastic laundry bags is very small scale, and the cost saving there isn't huge. So I think definitely the future will look at larger and really long-term ways to save money and to be sustainable.
Cool. Now, there's a question that came through about cleaning methods against COVID. And that's going to cost the industry huge amount. So looking at some of this implementation certificate costs, could be a marketing ploy, right, to rebuild trust. I'm going to twist that question to ask you as a parting word. If you have $1 to spend between technology and saving costs in terms of technology, and that $1 that you can spend on to make your guests feel better at ease, which will you spend on and why? Enough?
It's a difficult question because
It's meant to
actually,
be.
yeah, change to our cleanliness standards. To be honest, there weren't a lot of changes made. It was more, emphasizing that you make sure you're doing all of these steps because being from a five-star company, we have very high standards anyway. So if I had $1 to spend, um, I'm a huge advocate for associates. I would always put manpower in because I think what Sai mentioned is hospitality is about people, and that's why you go away to a hotel, right? Is to be looked after. So from a guest point of view, I would spend my dollar on making sure you have the right people. From an operator point of view, you spend the dollar on technology because that is going to save you money in the long term.
Oh, come on. So you're standing the fence. Yeah. But good answer. Sai?
Sorry, I completely sort of agree with that. Like, I mean, it's I mean, I think it is the right thing to do. Like, there is nothing that you can sort of do to go around this problem. You just have to face it head on. You just have to accept that this is your new reality. How do I sort of use tech to my advantage to actually sort of keep the parts of hospitality that I want to keep while still reducing costs and being sort of margin focused? Because again, you have so many players when it comes to a hotel, right? Like you have owners who expect a certain sort of profit. You have operators, the corporate office is driving them to hit certain numbers, certain targets. And then you have guests expecting certain things of you because, I've come here for my vacation. I want to be pampered. And someone sitting in the middle of all these three things, it's a very, very hard job. And, if you want to please all three people, like, you gotta pick your battles, and you have to look at, okay, so what can I sacrifice that's acceptable to each of these parties, and then how do I sort of do that in the sort of most efficient manner? And I think these are problems that are well suited for smart people with smart technology. So that's the way to go.
Hamza, I'm going to turn to you. With that $1, how would you spend it? On the guests, to make the guests feel good, or to spend on cost savings?
I think it has to be in this environment where I think you're losing customers. I think you got to spend on and getting better customers. I think across, if you're a hospitality business or even your restaurant business, whatever business you're in now, just getting back to normality, and you would spend that dollar to get back the consumer rather than saving the dollar and you don't know when the revenue top line will come back anyway. I mean, I would say offense is probably the best defense at the moment, given no one knows what to do.
Yeah, good pick. Well, it is tough, especially in this environment when every dollar counts. So it's real. It is not a question just asking you, to put you on the stand, but really it is real. Where you have that, how do you spend it? Well, one final question that came through. I'm going to open it to either Pranav or Sai about technology. And how could technology reduce human element in hospitality industry? Apart from robots.
So maybe I'll go first. My view on this is that it's not about reducing the number of humans involved, but rather like being more efficient and productive about it. Like you just want to be able to have these sort of right people working on the right things with the right information so that they can do their job very well, and not sort of waste time or like have downtime effectively, where they don't sort of know what they're doing, or like maybe they actually want to work on a particular problem or a task, but they don't have all the relevant information. And I think like looking at sort of where this is going, like one of the thoughts that we've been having internally is how do you sort of change your hospitality or the hotel sort of operations platform to be something that's more homogeneous, right? Like all of your staff are actually trained in multiple different departments. They can do multiple different things. And based on demand and occupancy rate and what's relevant at that point in time, they're being allocated to work on the right things. So in practice, this might be that your maintenance person who's there on site to make sure that if something goes wrong, it gets fixed. If there's nothing to do, he might actually be doing housekeeping chores for a while, or playing front of house or being assigned to sort of back office tasks, right? And same goes for sort of like guest services. Like maybe there aren't so many check-ins happening during particular hours. They can be focused on something else. And I think that concept of sort of unifying your workforce so that they're able to be deployed, and of course you have to sort of cross-train them in sort of multiple things, but it's a very worthy investment, especially now. And it also comes with the advantage that when your staff feel a lot more engaged and taken care of, and that they're being upskilled, you also start to reduce your churn rate of losing your sort of, and we all know that in hospitality, the turnover rate of staff is one of the highest, and this might actually help with that as well. So the way I see it, you need a new kind of operations platform for your hotel, where at the start of the day, the right people know what they're going to be working on, what their day looks like, and at any point in time, like any task that they're working on, they have the relevant information and context. You as a GM, you're able to look at a dashboard of sorts, and at the end of the day, you're able to just say that everything is going well. My hotel's health looks fantastic. Things are going as planned. I don't see sort of any major issues happening with any of my rooms, any of my common areas, my restaurants, spa, all of that. And that you also need a way to sort of measure your guests' impression on your hotel. So if you could pull that information in and tie that together with how your staff have been performing things, then you start to see a lot more sort of correlation between like the efforts that I'm putting in as the hotel, how does that affect my guest experience and guest outcomes, and then you start to invest a lot better in your sort of people. So this is sort of how I'm seeing it right now.
Right. Well, thank you. Looks like we just passed the hour, and that's all we have time for. I'm going to wrap this up. Really appreciate Banav, Sai, and Hamza, and of course the organizer, SensorFlow, for this event.